Now, welcome back. Following up on Weekend Reports, so the senior pilot was asked to resign from SAA earlier this year after it was found that he had flown commercial airplanes for more than 20 years with a fake license. The Mail and Guardian reported that SAA allegedly discovered that William Chandler's airline transport pilot license had been forged. This after an investigation into a reportable incident on a flight he piloted. Joining us now in the studio are Mail and Guardian reporter Sabelo Skiti, who's furthest to my left, and Phindiwe Gwebu of the South African Civil Aviation Authority. She's the Executive Corporate Services head there. Very good evening to you both, and thank you so much for joining us. Perhaps let's start with you, Sabelo. How did the story land on your lap, and is that how it happened?
Well, the information sort of came to us, I think it was probably around this time last week. These were obviously people from within the airline. They were feeling quite incensed at what they perceived to be unequal treatment around, the discovery about Mr. Chandler's, indiscretion. So they thought that, there was the possibility of a cover-up within the airline, and they sort of wanted this thing to be put out there so that the public can actually know, that this is what is actually happening.
So is this the first time the issue of his qualifications comes to light? Is that what you're saying?
Look, from the understanding, from the people that we spoke to internally, on an off-the-record basis, as well as what the airline has told us, there had been no suspicion that Mr. Chandler's ATP could be illegitimate. It was only once the investigation happened that they discovered this. This was, of course, when there's these reportable incidents. Airlines would have standard operating procedures. So one of them would be to say you ground the whole crew, and then you look into the incident to make sure that, to determine whether is it, driver error, is it the environment, is it the aircraft.
So what were the exact details of that flight to Frankfurt? Was he on the handles? Was he flying the plane?
Look, this is the information that we're getting. The airline is not commenting in detail about that. They're just saying that Mr. Chandler was a co-pilot. But from what we understand, yes, he was the co-pilot. There was a senior captain, who was in command of the aircraft. But at the time that the incident actually happened, Mr. Chandler actually had the controls. So the problem could have been his reaction to an environmental change during the flight, or it could have been caused by, his handling of the aircraft. Because I think the nature of the investigations and how they happen, it's not possible to know right now all of the full detail.
So is that when, according to your knowledge, SAA, the airline, then went into the subject of his qualifications? Because we understand that he turned down a promotion some years ago.
Yes. So how it works basically in aviation, especially in the commercial sphere, is that you would join an airline as a first officer. And then you would begin piloting aircraft. You would probably fly the smaller aircraft to get your hours up. As you get the experience and as you feel more comfortable and are more familiar with the aircraft, you would then fly your bigger aircraft longer distances as a co-pilot. You would get various promotions to senior first officer until you make captain. That would generally take between anything between 8 to 12 years for you to make captain. 10 years is the norm. But within that period, you also then are required to do your own upskilling by getting different licensing.
Okay, so let's come to the issue of the licensing. First of all, Phindiwe, is this unusual that somebody who's been flying an airplane for 20 years is found to be wanting on the qualification side?
From our perspective, it's very unusual. I can also confirm that it's probably the first incident that we are investigating where a pilot would have successfully faked the license because he's been flying with it. However, the records within the custodianship of the CAA, because we are the body that are licensed or rather mandated to issue pilot licenses. So I would assume that operators would, if in doubt,
so would that suggest something being done from the inside? If somebody successfully forged their pilot license, as you say, which you say you find it very difficult to believe that he was able to be successful?
You know, the type of training that the pilots do most of the time, especially when they then get promoted to fly these big jets, is that you'd find that over a number of years they have been flying in the aircraft, but not as the captain in command. And for the big jets, normally they would also, for especially SAA, for transformation purposes, they would also extend, you know,
We'll get to the issue of transformation for in just a moment, but I want you to tell us what is the difference or the distinction between an airline transport pilot license and a commercial pilot license?
Okay, the difference first and foremost is the number of hours that they would each have flown before they qualify to get that license. So for a commercial pilot license, this is like the third highest license that you can get as a pilot. And you first have to have 200 hours. But of course, the airlines would decide from time to time to increase those number of hours based on their security risks and so on and so forth. But from the CAA, you'll get a commercial pilot license if you've got 200 hours. And then out of those hours, some of them you would have had to fly with people or alone, which means in our terminology, we'd say solo. And the ATPL, you have to have, in South African law, 1,500 hours. So you can see the gap.
Yes.
It's quite huge.
So for senior first officer status, that would be what, the ATPL? And is that captain status as well?
Even as a commercial, it depends on the rules of the airline, because we don't dictate. All we do is we issue the licenses and we'll tell you this person is competent in ABCD.
I'm just curious here, Sabelo. We've seen a statement by SAA saying that, well, you know, they're asking him to pay back the money that he's earned, including the privileges, the perks that he got from the job, but that passengers were never in danger. What does that mean? That it doesn't make a difference?
It makes a very big difference. I think, you know, SAA is obviously, being in the position that the airline is in, wants to quell any sort of panic. But this is something that we ought to be very, very worried about, because this is akin to me saying, just because my 12-year-old son has been driving to the shop to buy the newspaper for me for 6 Sundays in a row, and there's been no incident, it's fine.
I asked that because you also, I think, included in your story about a Swedish pilot who was found to have committed the same crime, and he was benched, so to speak. He had his license revoked or suspended for a certain amount of time, and even then the airline said, well, he's been flying successfully for 12 years and there have been no incidents. Does that mean that they undercut the value of the hours spent flying to get those qualifications?
I think it's PR, to be honest with you. I think the airlines are very, very concerned about this. I mean, if you look at the statement that they issued, this is South African Airways, they talk about review of processes and looking at how they do these verification checks. I mean, the reality is that we're also looking at a massive risk from an insurance perspective. Were something to happen while Mr. Chandler was operating an aircraft of a size that is bigger than what his CPL allows, he would literally, the airline would be liable for any damages that would come from that. This is civil cases of the people that are on the aircraft, and if the aircraft crashes into a building with lots of people in it and people get injured or die, then all of the civil suits will go to the airline, and no insurer will pay that out because the man was operating something he wasn't certified to operate.
And Phindiwe, you spoke about the issue of transformation. I mean, I think in 2016 or so, the SAA Pilots Association said that most of the pilots in this country are qualified. And for me, that's rather jarring to say most, if not all.
Look, from a transformation point of view, SAA launched, I think, a program to try and accommodate, especially black pilots, because Tepiso, flying is very expensive. To build those hours from 200 to about 1,500 cost a lot of money, and not many black pilots get an opportunity to do that. For them to allow these pilots to get exposure, they started lowering the hours that the pilots can fly inside the cockpit, just so that they can get exposure and they then get to qualify a little bit more quicker. But I think what is more important here is that for us as a civil aviation authority, what becomes critical is really the safety of people. And therefore, for any initiative like that, all we're concerned about is whether it's not going to affect the safety of people on the ground, or even of the crew and the passengers, But so far we haven't had a problem. In fact, we encouraged the move because we felt that it is actually contributing towards transformation. So,
but the same Pilots Association was also warning, because I believe aviation is one of the fastest rising industries, about 50% already, and there are more and more pilots that are needed. What are they doing to ensure that they have skills transfer from those highly qualified pilots, which they say are being sought all over the world?
One of the things about, and that's worrying us especially about this case, is the fact that it's going to affect the reputation of the South African license. South African pilots are sought after worldwide, especially in the Middle East, because of the training that they undergo. So from a training perspective, we believe that initiatives such as the one that SAA introduced a couple of years ago are enough for us to open up the industry and make sure that more and more pilots become experienced and gain experience by participating in the flight. So we would encourage something like that. But of course, airlines can do much more in terms of making sure that they build up the pipeline. But currently, the results are not showing. Our statistics, for instance, show that at least at about 89% of our pilots are white and male. And it means the remainder of the others are African, colored, and Indian. And that's not a good picture for us.
And how many are women?
And it's still expensive. Women are even lower. Even lower.
Sabelo, I'm just wondering here, if we're saying in the next 20 years, 350,000 more pilots will be needed, or 350,000 pilots will be needed to fly the various number of aircrafts needed. Is it then easier for those who've been in the industry long to get away with not having to show their qualifications because they've been there for so long? And I'm just taking it to its natural conclusion. If you say there is an entrenched old guard, that would mean that perhaps it would be thought there's no need to check their credentials.
Well, I mean, this is precisely, what we are faced with here. I think a lot of, how Mr. Chandler got away with it is that maybe some of the upcoming pilots would have said, we can't really question, these guys' credentials. They've been here forever. They know the company. They've been flying forever. And these guys then get to choose, the best routes. They get to fly, those long haul, flights.
Yeah.
And of course, this comes with various perks, from hotel stay to, longer leave allowance, et cetera, on top of the salaries. So it actually, even on itself, this thing has an effect of saying that it's actually killing up-and-coming pilots that should be getting those access to those hours, getting in the cockpits, flying to long-haul destinations.
Should we be worrying about the pilots who fly us? Not largely, but should we be worrying that there are some pilots out there who are flying either with fake credentials or who don't have the necessary qualifications?
If I can come in there, I don't think that we should be worried.
No.
But I think it's worth for the airlines to actually verify with the CA, because that information is readily available. In fact, when the media contacted us about the story, it was easy. We just went to the record and we said, no, the guy has got a CPL. And it's as easy as that. SAA has now sent all of their plus approximately 900 pilot licenses for us to verify, to validate on their behalf. But because of the costs that are involved, should a person be found not to have met the correct qualifications, the airlines would go down.
Are you going to be looking internally into your own divisions to see whether or not there has been any nefarious activity to aid people who are using fake licenses?
From the records that we checked, there was no trace of at least this particular pilot. So the loopholes would seem at this point have happened solely from the side of the operator. I say this because we're not done with our investigation yet, but just the one piece of paper that they produced from the CAA.
Just over the years, how many pilots have been found to have fake licenses or to be unqualified for the job that they do?
I wouldn't know, because none of those matters have been brought to our attention. In the 13 years I've been with the CAA, nothing like this has happened.
Is it the first that you hear, Sabelo?
I've heard a couple of things, but what I've not
What
established
things have
is
you
whether,
heard?
just various airlines and various pilots. I mean, especially now that we've published this article, a lot more people have come and said, look, we know of A, B, C, D.
So the rot could be deeper, is that what
yes.
you're saying?
No, look, my main concern, right, and my main worry around this is the fact that if you look at SAA's wording in their statement, they talk about processes, but they forget that what drives processes are individuals and it's people. So I don't know to what extent they've gone further to check who Mr. Chandler, for instance, has been submitting his qualifications to, what that individual has done with that information. Did they verify with the CAA whether indeed Mr. Chandler does have an ATP? If they didn't do that, why not? If they did do that and find out that he doesn't, what action did they take? Are we looking at a situation where there could be 10, 11, 12 more pilots at SAA who, through one individual in operations, are able to carry on this ruse and earning money and putting people's lives in danger?
More questions, and we certainly will seek to answer that. Mail and Guardian investigative journalist Sabelo Skiti and Phindiwe Gwebu of the Aviation Association's Executive Corporate Services. Thank you very much.